So let's keep it moving. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, guys. Yalla, man. Let's get straight into this. We're going to be talking business context. So these sessions will be accompanying the toolkits that I'll be handing out in the group. And now, as you know, I've already submitted to you guys the toolkit for problem solving. But today, this is the session for session one, I should say. And there will be a toolkit which I will release immediately after this particular session. So, but for business context, right? So we've got business context, problem solving, financial modeling, and presentation. So each one of these sessions will have its own toolkit, but over the next couple of weeks, I want to do these sessions, get that foundation back in, and then we can start going into a lot more deep diving into the case studies. Anyway, I'm just trying to make it, I'm trying to do things differently, trying to make it better. Let's see how it goes, inshallah. So without further delay, so what I would like to discuss today, guys, is obviously value creation, because that's the essence of what we do. Then I want to talk about the strategy models, the business models, the operating models in a little bit more detail. So rather than kind of talk about it contextually, I want to go into it in a little bit more detail. I want to talk about performance infrastructure, very, very important. And of course, I want to contextualize it when, what we talk about strategy and business planning and consulting in general, right? Because consulting in general fundamentally is about transforming from one state to a new state, right? From your current state to a future state. That is the essence of it. And really what I'm trying to do here, guys, is I'm trying to build everyone's spider sense, right? And everyone's spider sense in the context of what is good. Now, as a function of what is good, right? This is a very subjective thing, right? Very, very subjective. You'll have a client will tell you, well, this is what I think is good. You will have a boss who will say, no, this is what I think is good. You could have colleagues and whoever tell you this is what I think is good. Different companies will have, their own kind of definitions of what they think is good as well, right? But because there is so much subjectivity to what is good, the idea is that, guys, without the level of confidence in your work, right? Without the confidence in your work, you're never going to be in a position to say, yep, I know this is good. So I can take, maybe 10% of your input or 0% of your input or 50% of your input, whatever, or 75% of your input, whatever it is, right? You have to have that confidence that you're doing good. And I mentioned this about AI, right? AI equals garbage in versus garbage out, right? Now, the only way, Now, the only way you're going to be able to replace a consultant using AI is if you have a understanding of what is good, because you have to have an end point when you're prompting. You can prompt it for research, you can prompt it for insights and so on. But remember, a consultant and the consulting skills aren't there to just do research and analysis. The idea is there to help make decisions. Right? It's to help facilitate decision-making. Ultimately, we are decision-making support. So for me, being able to know what is good is extremely important. So the purpose of kind of doing it, the Boost Analyst program with this intention, with this approach, is to help everyone build in their spider sense for what is good work, right? And when we go through it, it'll hopefully make a bit more sense. But I hope this concept of what is good kind of at least gives you an idea, right? Because what we don't want to do is constantly, when you have all these different pressures around you, right? Colleagues, clients, companies, etc. What is what? There's a lot of kind of second guessing of the work you're doing, and we want to minimize, or rather, not even minimize. We want to obviously be able to create work which is good, universally accepted as good, in order for us to build our confidence, in order for us to minimize the amount of pushback on our work, because we know it's good, right? And like I said, it's very subjective, but at the same time, there should be some level of kind of confidence that we have to avoid us getting, falling into that. But anyway, let's see how it goes. So first things first, man, as always, bros, I always talk about value creation, right? Because ultimately, any organization that wants to be noticed, wants to get things done, if they're not creating value, then it's of no use, right? So the formula for value fundamentally is you have a level of resource. That resource could be money plus people, and it could be assets, it could be whatever. These are manifestations of money and people, right? And then, of course, it's a function of time, or well, not multiplied by, but plus time. So whatever it is resource plus time equals 3, right? So it can't ever equal 2, because then if you rub 2 sticks together and it doesn't do anything, then you haven't created value. So if we're not creating value, fundamentally, we're basically wasting resource, and we're wasting time, and we're wasting money, right? So there has to be some level of incremental value that we create, and as part of creating that incremental value, it has to be relative to what we are trying to achieve. So the relativity of that could be where there is too much value creation, and if there is too much value creation, then fundamentally something that we've created is too good to be true, at which point it doesn't make sense, and then it could be too little. So the returned amount of value that you've created doesn't make sense. So we don't want to be here, and we don't want to be here. And we have to be, the amount of money and time and resource versus people being expended, or people resource being expended, has to fit within kind of what's accepted generally. So again, this goes back to being good, right? Because if you create something, or rather, if you ask a business to do something and the amount of value it's creating seems too much or too good to be true, it's usually is too good to be true, right? So when we're talking about incremental value, right, this delta that we're trying to create, that delta needs to be relative to, whatever it is that we're inputting. So if we're inputting 1 million and we're expecting 1 billion, unfortunately, that lands right here. And if we're inputting 1 billion and we're only creating an extra 1 million, that would land here. So again, that's the point what I'm trying to make here. Incremental value fundamentally has to be relative to the amount of inputs. If this is the input, and I like speaking about inputs and outputs, because fundamentally inputs and outputs is the name of the game, right? In consulting, we're constantly going back and forward on inputs and outputs. So incremental value is the name of the game. Doesn't matter what type of organization it is. And we're going to talk about the different types of value, because value could mean many different things. But I wanted to put that kind of contextualization of value before we go into what is value. So what we're striving for is good, right? That's what we're striving for. We're striving for good. So this, and again, the idea of consulting isn't to come up with ideas which are fantastic and amazing. It's about coming up with ideas which are good, which have a high probability, right, of success, right? And I say this when we talk about financial models. If you remember, I always say that financial modeling is a function of, putting together numbers that are realistic in the sense of they can be achieved. And probability is a great way of looking at that. So anyway, we'll keep it moving, but does anyone have any questions on this? So now after every slide, I want to have anyone have any questions about value creation or anything like that? If not, it's all good, man. There's lots of space for us to jump in, but if there's any comments or questions after any slide, then I want to give anyone a space to have a think about it, jump in or whatever. But I'll keep it moving for the time being, because I suspect most of us have already seen this slide anyway. So for me, there are 4 types of value creation, right? So these are the types of traditional value creation. Now, someone super smart could probably come up with a couple of others, but whenever I'm talking to leaders and decision makers, these are usually the 4 types of value that they're looking for whenever they're making a big decision. So it doesn't matter if it's a private for-profit, a private not-for-profit, and a public entity. It's usually one, or if not 4 of these 4, but to different degrees, right? So we have to be conscious that not every single organization prioritizes these 4 at the same weightage. So if we talk about, for example, private entities, when we talk about private entities, the first kind of usual priority for a private for-profit entity would naturally be financial. And obviously, they have to give the profits back to their shareholders. So as a result, they prioritize that. But in order for them to achieve financial value, they have to have some level of operational value. And of course, they need to be strategically placed to do so as well. When we talk about non-profits again, it's a misconception, but non-profits have to create profits. It's just that the profits that they do create are reinvested in the business rather than given to their shareholders as such. So accordingly, a non-profit would also be trying to create financial value. It will have to create an operational business, and of course, it will have to strategically be kind of generating value as well. But one small difference is that non-profits may have an agenda, which is kind of, we need to create some kind of economic impact within a certain area, a certain sector, and so on and so forth. So they may have a dotted line there. But when it comes to the public sector also tries to create value, but their value is slightly different, right? So their value will definitely be economic value. So they may have some policies that they want to drive, which will create economic value. For example, the empowerment of women in a particular country, right? They will definitely want to be strategically placing themselves, because at a country level, countries are effectively competing with other countries, so they are strategically trying to reposition themselves.
Sorry to interrupt you on this point, but I think that would be more related to the political side. If you're trying to position a nation, that's like, let's say for Vision 2030, for example, it's an internal vision, but then at the same time, it's globally relevant if you want to make it more of a woman empowerment related move, correct?
Well, women empowerment happens both at a global level, but also at a domestic level as well.
Right, so it can touch both the economic and the political aspect. If I'm
Absolutely. Yep. So in fact, maybe economic could be split into domestic and international, right?
Yes.
And this is what I'm saying. These are generally kind of the way I see it, right? So if there's additional layers to this, absolutely, right? So yeah, I agree with you. Could be political, could be economic, right? So from a public perspective, we would also be looking at operational, because in order to bring these things to life, fundamentally, there needs to be some level of operational efficiency. Now, here is an interesting one, that a lot of public institutions, especially in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia today, they are now looking at financial value creation as well, but not financial for the sake of building profits, etc. But I want to give you guys a little quick case study. Right? So let's talk about case studies. So the case study here is how are governments or government entities in KSA trying to create financial value, right? So in order to understand that, what we need to think of is, let's think about any government entity. Let's talk about Riyadh Amana, which is the municipality of Riyadh, right? So historically, every year, right, there would be a process of, say this is the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance will receive a plan from Riyadh Amana, right? And as part of receiving that plan, they would then receive a budget according to that particular plan. That plan would consider, last year, what did you do? What did you achieve? And what are you trying to achieve this year? And that was how it's usually the Riyadh Amana plan. So you'd have employees in the Riyadh Amana, and these guys are operationally there to support Riyadh Amana. And Riyadh Amana's job is to do what? It's to help citizens of Riyadh, and it's there to help businesses in Riyadh, right? So the question is then, how could we summarize the role of Riyadh? One of the key things that Riyadh Amana is trying to do is improve the quality of life for residents and businesses in Riyadh, right? So this is a very, very important mandate. But as this mandate becomes bigger and more aggressive, the amount of funding that comes from the Ministry of Finance rather, is reducing, right? So the idea is that a big part of the plan now is there will always be some level of funding support, right, for Riyadh Amana, but they have additional targets now, right? And the additional targets is how much of your funding are you generating yourself? And this is a trend that I've seen across almost every single government entity in the kingdom now, right? Which is, okay, look, this isn't about just asking for, coming up with good ideas and asking for money. How are you going to be self-sufficient, right? It's a very, very important, unique concept. So how are we going to help these people to the maximum extent possible? The targets are getting much more aggressive. We want Riyadh to become for example, a top 10 city globally. So entities within the government, especially organizations like Riyadh Amana, what they do is they are now creating services for individuals and services for businesses. So a service for a business, for an individual, could be, for example, applying for a license to build an additional floor on your house, right? So these are like mini construction licenses, right? And that would be, usually that's a free service. So they'll offer one for free, and then they'll offer express or VIP service, right? And again, they'll do the same here. They'll offer you a free one because that's the role of Riyad Amana, but they'll also offer you an express service. So this could happen in, say, 10 days, and this could happen in 24 hours, right? 10 days versus 24 hours. And as a result of which, they will be able to charge a fee, right? So that fee then goes back into Riyad Amana, which allows it to kind of constantly fix this loop without having to constantly be waiting for Ministry of Finance. Do you see how that works, man? So even though it's a government entity, it's there to help the citizens and the people of the kingdom, fundamentally, they are now looking at financials. So again, I wanted to just show you like different types of organizations have different types of priorities, but generally speaking, it kind of falls into one of these categories here. And almost every single organization has some kind of, even if it's not a direct line, it could be a dotted line towards each of these kind of types of value. So any thoughts on this, guys? Anyone, any ideas on this, etc.? But you see this with every single government entity. And they're often, and another thing that Riyad Amana is doing now is taking very seriously, basically fines, etc. Right? It's very important, right? These are revenue streams for government, but not to enrich the government. It's to reinvest back into the public, right? So the money comes in and it goes back in, increases the quality of life, all the service provisions, and so on, right? So again, very, very interesting stuff taking place now in the government. And I think this is a trend that's not only in Saudi, it's across the entire region, but maybe even the entire world, where the government is trying to raise money for services it provides. But normally the way it works is they offer a free service because that's their mandate, and they'll offer you an additional express-based service, right? That's how that works. So no questions about that. Let's keep it moving because there's a bunch of slides we need to get through. So if that's, if value creation is the name of the game, then leaders of organizations are constantly creating value, right? They have to constantly create value. If value creation is the ultimate objective, then leaders fundamentally have to be creating value every minute of the day. And the way they do that is through this triangle, right? So they have to fundamentally design a strategy, business model, and an operating model, and they are constantly configuring between these three things, right? They are constantly aligning these three things in order to create value, right? So they are constantly tuning, adjusting, aligning, repurposing strategy, business model, and operating model. And they're doing these things, number one, at an independent level, but also at an interdependent level. And I like to explain this, you guys know now, I like to explain this using my analogy of a car, right? So a car has three key components, and so does a strategy. So in order for a car to function, to come to life, it needs a driver, it needs a direction, right? This is your driver, your direction, call it what you want, right? Right, that's part one. And then you have to have an engine in your car, right? So the engine, depending on how fast you want to go, where you want to go, the type of comfort with which you want to go with, it might be a V8 bi-turbo, or it might be electric engine, right? So then you have the driver and you have the engine. So this is your driver, this is your engine, and then of course you have the transmission. So the transmission does what? The transmission takes the power from the engine, right? I've just ruined this completely. It's made this into a bus, right? But the purpose of the transmission is to take that power and put it into the wheels in order for you to make progress. So now we have a car. So for me, all of these three things have to work sustainably and suitably together, both independent and interdependently, in order for it to work. And we're going to go into this in a much more detail, but progress, that's the main thing we're trying to achieve here, right? We're trying to go forward. We're trying to move and make things happen. So progress is the critical part of all of this. And in order to do that, they have these 12 boxes. So there's 4 boxes under your strategy, there's 4 boxes under your business model, and there's 4 boxes under your operating model. So leaders are fundamentally creating value every single day with their organizations, and they are constantly just manipulating these boxes to create that value. And we're going to go into this in much more detail, but again, it was just to kind of implant that in our head, that value is recognized in organizations as a function of manipulating what I call the B12 framework, right? So the B is for boost, and there are 12 boxes, so henceforth it's the B12 framework. A lot of people, when they design operating models, they don't design it they design it as a pyramid, but they design it in layers like this. So this is the strategy, this is the business model, and this is the operating model. And sometimes they flip this and this around. And I don't think it gives a good representation of the dynamic nature of what CEOs have to do. It doesn't cascade, right? It doesn't cascade. For me, it's much more dynamic, which is why I like to use this kind of mechanics to show the interdependency of all of these things, right? Because sometimes you can start, this whole process, you can start here with an existing business. You can say, where are we struggling today? We have a people problem, okay? The people problem is stopping us from hitting our objectives of doubling our sales. So we need to, sometimes you can start here. The price of our stuff in the market is significantly lower than our competitors. How do we increase it? So again, an initiative could be to increase it. So I don't like to have a fixed starting point. I don't want to make the process of defining how we create value. I don't want it to be linear. I want it to be dynamic. But anyway, again, we will go into this in more details. Does anyone have any questions about this? This is central to what we do, but again, we're going to go into it in much more detail. Any thoughts, any questions, guys, bros? All right, no worries at all. Let's keep it moving. So now I want to deep dive into strategy, right? Strategy is probably, and I've said this a million times, one of the most misused words in the business world. But strategy fundamentally is about giving you direction, right? So if the key word in strategy is direction, in order for you to receive some kind of direction, right? You kind of first thing you have to do is you have to kind of define the destination, right? So if that's part one, right? So we've got point B and we've got point A, right? So if the objective of strategy is direction, is to get us from point A to point B. In order for us to do that, step one, we have to define the destination, whether that's increased profitability, increased operational efficiencies, increased strategic, market share, whatever it is. It could be multiple of these things, but we have to start thinking immediately about defining what the end result of that could be, right? So once we've defined this, the next thing we need to do is then say, okay, well, we know that that's the destination. We need to start thinking about what's the route, right? So the route could look a bit like this, right? Right. So the route is never as simple as we think it is when we're doing from point A to point B. And of course, whilst we're doing and designing the route, we might be able to find some efficiencies, right? So we can say, we don't need to do this. We don't need to do this. We can think of a more optimal route, which will get us directly from point A to point B without going in circles or without having to, retrack or recalibrate our route, right? Or rather with recalibrating our route. And then of course, the third element is how, right? So we need to define where we're going, what's the route, and then how are we going to go on this route? So that could be, from a route perspective, is a function of, maybe we need to walk, maybe we need to get a boat at this point, maybe we need to get a car here, right? Maybe we need to get on a bicycle at some point, and so on, right? But the point is, to get from point A to point B, we need to, number one, define the route, define the destination, create the route, and then figure out the how. And for me, that's how, and that's a very good representation of strategy, right? It's not, again, it's not just a bunch of words that you put together and therefore there is an outcome. Remember, if you can't implement your strategy, right? If your strategy is not broken down enough to a level, to an extent whereby people know what the implications are, people know what they're doing, it's of no use. One of the biggest reasons why a strategy fail is because it's just not transferable, it's not understandable, it's not digestible by the people who have to execute it. So there is a disconnect, in an organization from the guys who design strategy, right? So the leaders are the ones who design strategy, and then the workers are the ones who execute it, right? So if there is a disconnect between here and here, and this is usually the reason why transformation programs fail. There's a resistance, there is a disconnect, there is a, yada, 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 whatever, there's a mistrust, whatever it is. This is why strategy fails. So the easier and the more coherent that the story is of getting from point A to point B in terms of defining the destination, what is the route that we're going to take, and of course, the how we're going to get there, the vehicle or the transmission that's going to get us there. It goes back nicely into this whole idea of the car analogy, right? So that's why I like using the car analogy, because it gives us that, right? But we need to be dynamic, because sometimes a car might be good for only a part of the journey, whereas initially we need to start slow, and then we need to get across some hurdles, but eventually, so again, the idea is that this is a dynamic journey as such, right? So again, keeping it moving, because I appreciate there's a lot to get through, right? In order, therefore, so again, understanding that a lot of resistance comes with strategy, right? Whenever you're changing the direction or you're trying to make things happen in an organization, remember, you're fundamentally dealing with processes which are rigid and people who are emotional. You always have to find the balance. It needs to, there needs to be a balance between what do you have in terms of your inputs, right? So you have money, you have people, you have time, and that has to be balanced with the outcomes, right? So the outcomes needs to be, okay, well, there needs to be growth, expansion, diversification. These are the types of things that, CEOs are traditionally thinking about. It's not extensive or exhaustive, but these are the types of things. But irrespective, whatever you're doing from an input perspective, or whatever you're doing in terms of your resource management, right, there has to be some level of balance between your capability and your expectations, right? So this is a very good way of looking at it, that there has to be this level of balance. So strategy without balance is you're asking for that resistance, you're asking for that failure, you're asking for that misunderstanding, misalignment, and all the different things that we spoke about. So strategy inherently requires these types of things. And again, if you're placing a huge amount of weight on money, people, and time, and actually the benefit of that is not, or rather the benefit of that is not substantial enough, then again, you're misaligning the uses of your resource. And we have to understand there's a key thing here, right? That fundamentally, this stuff is finite. It's not infinite. You don't have it unlimited, right? You definitely don't have an unlimited time. As a CEO, if you're not making good progress within a year, 2 years, people will start to notice, right? So again, and if you're spending huge amounts of money and there is no kind of, and you have to be careful about this, right? You can say, well, look, if we invest in this and we're going to make money in 20 years time, again, who knows what's going to happen in 20 years time? So money, people, how happy they are, et cetera, all of that needs to be balanced. So this stuff is constantly, again, you're constantly having to, in terms of making sure that things come to light and you're executing them accordingly, that it requires balance. Now, therefore, what are the good characteristics? And therefore, this is what I'm saying. I'm trying to move into now, okay, well, how do we build our spider sense of good, right? So what are the kind of characteristics of when you're designing a strategy for an organization, and henceforth you're designing the direction for an organization? What are the key things you should be looking for? You need to be looking for focus, right? Does our strategy, is this strategy that I'm preparing for the organization, does it allow us to concentrate on what's most important? It's a good question to ask, right? Ask yourself these questions when you're designing strategy, because fundamentally, if you are designing a strategy and you're not focusing on utilizing your resources accurately, then it's going to be a useless strategy, right? Is it telling us what choice to take, right? Is it telling us what choice to take? Because if it's not, again, we are potentially going to waste our energy. and again, resource are finite, we can't do that. Is it helping us win, or is it just helping us survive? So a good strategy is not just about, fixing a problem. A good strategy is about fixing a problem and creating advantage, right? Again, so you can ask yourself these questions when you're designing these things and you're working with decision makers and so on. If you're not able to say that in your strategy, they will have the ability to challenge. So what we're looking for with each of these, and of course, alignment, like I said, is very important. So the disconnect between the thinking and the doing is the fastest way of making strategy fail. So in essence, each of these does what? These become anchors in your strategy, right? And you need to ask yourself, right, constantly, okay, I'm designing a strategy. A strategy is a fundamental document or a mechanism within our organization which dictates our direction. So in designing the direction for our organization, I need to make sure it passes certain tests: the focus test, the advantage test, the choice test, the alignment test. And hopefully what you'll find is that the answer to each of these should be relatively clear. But again, we have to make sure that it is relative to the amount of output and the amount of benefit that we're creating, right? So again, yes, it might give us the right choice, but is that choice even reasonable? Is it achievable? Is it even, within our capacity and capability? So we need to be constantly asking ourselves these questions, because that's how people will challenge us when we're doing these things on their behalf as a consultant. Now, in order to then therefore start designing our strategy, right? For us to then say, okay, well, I understand what is strategy. I understand what are the key, what does a good strategy entail? I know strategy is about creating balance. So what are the frameworks? What are the frameworks that we can use to help populate strategy? And guys, honestly, man, when it comes to consulting frameworks, I'm not a big fan, right? Especially in light of AI and stuff like that. All these frameworks become, what was the purpose of a framework? The purpose of a framework is basically to extract insights. That's what frameworks are for. But in light of AI, frameworks just become neither here nor there, right? It's just a way of extracting information and then expanding upon it, or just taking out kind of key insights from it. But still, I can't imagine them going anywhere anytime soon. It's just a good way of organizing information. So in terms of inputs to your strategy, you can do a SWOT analysis. I don't need to explain what that is. I think everyone knows. Pestle analysis, Porter's 5 forces. And in 16, 17 years of doing management consulting, I have never, ever used this, right? Never. But every time I present this without the Porter's 5 forces, people say, what about Porter's 5 forces? So I've included it because maybe everyone else uses it, but I have never in my life used Porter's 5 forces. But anyway, people do it. I use this one a lot though, which is, identifying what are our capabilities and, how much does it cost us to do this stuff? Does it actually make sense? And I find that this is relative kind of relative assessment of whether or not we can actually get things done. So these are nice inputs to a strategy. So if strategy is about setting direction, we need to find out, more about the organization, because we have to make sure that whatever we suggest to the organization is rooted in reality. That's actually a nice saying there. So rooted in reality. And for something to be rooted in reality, it fundamentally has to have some level of input, right? And the input to that is, a good input to your strategy will be a SWOT analysis, a Pestle analysis, resources. And if you want to be like super McKinsey consultant, Porter's 5 forces. I've never used it in my life, like I said, right? So to that end, let's talk about strategy development now. So as you've seen, if we go back a couple of slides, strategy is what? The strategy is, we're now focusing on this, right? So strategy is fundamentally about drivers or direction, whatever you want to call it. And there are 4 key elements of a strategy: the vision, mission, objectives, and initiatives. So let's deep dive on that quickly right now, right? So when we talk about strategy, what we're saying is Number one is the vision. So a vision statement, very simply, is usually some kind of grand statement which says, we want to be number one, or we want to be top 5, right? It's usually some kind of, where do we want to be, right? So if we talk about Pepsi could say, we want to be the number 1 carbonated drink manufacturer in the world. They want to be number 1, right? Or we want to be top 5 in Asia, right? Or something and so on, right? So for me, the vision is the starting point, right? And the vision is usually, like I said, to be the number 1, to be top 5, right? Now, in order for us to be the number 1 or top 5 in anything, right, what we need is a mission statement. And the mission statement basically is the how. How are we going to become number 1? In order for us to become number 1, we're going to say, for Pepsi, that is, we're going to make delicious products, right? We are going to have reasonable pricing, right? And we are going to have the most delicious product, reasonable pricing, and maybe the most efficient operations, right? Right. So does that make sense, guys? So we have this number 1. We want to be number 1. In order for us to be number 1, we have delicious products, reasonable pricing, efficient operations, right? And this is the first part of your strategy, right? So this part now is your strategy. This is the first part, right? And then we divide strategy. So then this part of your strategy here and this part of your strategy has 2 very different functions. So this part of your strategy is about direction, and this part becomes the execution, right? So in order for you to design whether you're going to become number 1, obviously there's a huge amount of input. So all those things we spoke about, SWOT analysis and all those things, PESTEL, SWOT, Porter's 5 forces or resource-based view. If everything within your organization is telling you can only aim for top 20, then your strategy will fundamentally have to adjust. Your mission may not adjust, but ultimately your goal or your vision will have to adjust based on the inputs that we've collected, right? And that's very, very important here. That being said, that's where we set the direction. Now, in order to make that direction come to life, what we start doing is start creating objectives, okay? And the purpose of an objective is to kind of quantify something that we're trying to achieve. So if we're going to become number 1 and we have to create delicious products, reasonable pricing, and so on. So if we're going to say for each of these things, right, we need a strategic, financial, and operational, strategic, financial, operational, strategic, financial, and operational objectives. So if we're going to create delicious products, a strategic objective could be, do some kind of testing around, taste, right? So if we're going to create, we can do some surveys and so on and so forth. So we can say we need a score of 97%, say that we are better tasting than Coca-Cola, right? That's a delicious product. And we validated that through some kind of objective of taste, right? Financially, delicious products will be represented by an increase in sales by 12%, right? And an operational thing could be that we are using 15% less sugar. Does that make sense, guys? Right? And from a reasonable pricing perspective, we can do the same, right? So the idea here is what exactly is happening so far? We're cascading from vision, mission into objectives. That's how you structure your strategy. Now, in order for you to then actually make this stuff come to life, you then need to start creating initiatives. What are initiatives? Initiatives are basically projects, right? So you go from vision, mission, objectives, initiatives. So let's just say you want to increase your sales by 12%. Let's focus on this one right here, because that one makes the most sense. You can have multiple initiatives or projects which will allow you to increase your sales. So one of them could be marketing. We need a new marketing campaign, right? We need to open up a new market. Right? We need to create a new market, right? So we need to open up in Vietnam, for example. That's an untapped market for us. We need to do a new thing, right? And then if you're going to increase sales, then potentially what we can say is, well, actually our products are underpriced. Maybe we need to do a dynamic pricing in Singapore, right? all of these things will fundamentally help you increase your sales. Does that make sense, guys? Like I hope this cascading makes sense. This is a very important part of strategy and understanding the execution of strategy as such. Without this, your strategy does not work. And this is the important part, sorry guys, of strategy as such. It has to cascade down. And once it's cascaded down, how do you monitor it? Very simple, right? You monitor it this way. So is strategy working? You monitor it back this way. So understanding vision, mission, objectives, initiatives is critical in terms of designing a strategy. But again, the strategy has to have let's go through it. Let's go through it. See, now that we've done that, this stuff will make a lot more sense. So again, strategy is fundamentally about direction. So this Pepsi example, we've created our direction. We want to be number one, right? We've looked at, balancing what our internal capabilities are, as well as, what we're trying to do in terms of our outcomes. We've looked at, our strategy. Is it focused? Yes, it is. We're focusing on Vietnam, and we're focusing on Singapore. Choices, advantage, alignment, delicious products and tastes, etc., etc. All of this stuff helps us fundamentally make things happen, right? And then, of course, we have, what are the inputs? So based on our inputs, we looked at SWOT analysis, and then so on and so forth. That helps us design where we need to be in terms of our strategy. And it all starts to populate and look like this, right? And some people put mission before vision. I think it's wrong, but some people do it and this is the hard part of kind of consulting and strategy, is that people think about things in very, very different ways, right? But this is probably the most widely accepted way of doing this stuff. So again, let's be a little bit specific about this. Let's try to keep one formula. And generally speaking, someone will say, oh no, initiatives become before objectives and objectives come before initiatives. As long as you understand contextually what is an objective and what is an initiative, you can do one before the other and so on, but not to overcomplicate it, right? Just give me 1 second, guys. Unfortunately, I just have to respond to this. Right. So everyone clear with this idea of vision, mission, objective, initiative? This is cascading one way. And then you have initiatives, objectives, mission, vision, which is then allowing you to monitor performance. This is how strategy is first defined and then, of course, executed. So again, I just want everyone to be comfortable with that, because if we understand that, we can then, okay, well, that's one part of the B12 framework. And then we can move on to the business model. So what have we done so far? We've understood this in much more detail, right? So if you understood what I've just explained, then you should be able to apply this logic to any setting, right? Whether it's financial services, whether it's, industrial development, whether it's, FMCG, whatever it is. The concept of strategy remains the same. Its application is obviously relative to what you're doing, but the vision, mission, objectives, initiatives, this remains constant, right? This is the whole purpose of organizations functioning. This concept remains constant. Might be some kind of personalization to this, but the process remains the same. So again, this is very important to the execution within organizations as such. Now, when we talk about business model, right? The business model for me is the engine, the revenue engine of an organization, right? So if the business model is the revenue engine, we have to have a product, what exactly are we selling to our customers, the price, And the price is interesting. It's not just about what you're charging your customers, it's a function of how you're charging as well. So whether you're charging them a subscription fee, whether it's just based on a product, whether it's, if you're offering economies of scale and so on, there's huge amount of strategy involved in pricing. It's never as simple as this is what I sell, this is the price, right? It's never as simple as that. There's, businesses make or break, succeed or fail on the basis of their pricing strategy alone. Right? It doesn't matter how good your product is. If there isn't an alignment between these two things, you will fail. And of course, that alignment continues. If there isn't an alignment as to where it's sold, and also how do you attract customers, this is fundamentally what drives your revenue, right? So that's why I like thinking of your business model as your revenue engine. Now, normally, or sometimes I should say, when people talk about business model, what they actually refer to is how. How are you charging people? So they talk about, oh, this is a SaaS business. The business model of this is SaaS. The business model of this is service-based, whatever, right? But I like to think of business model as a lot more comprehensive, because it is much more complicated than this. And what people try to do, you see, especially entrepreneurs, right? What they try to do is they look at average products and services, just normal things, and they try to just change the how. So, okay, they'll say, okay, well, this business historically, you'd have to buy laptops for your company, and then you'd have to spend a lot of money. So rather than sell them laptops, what we can do is sell them a subscription, right, for laptops. And they're like, we have $1 billion idea. And that's worked historically. But where do most entrepreneurs fail? Here. That's normally where it fails. Coming up with a good idea of a product or a service and a business model tends to be pretty easy. Where people fail the most, for me at least, is here, right? That this is, for me, is critical, is that people fundamentally don't know how to do marketing, don't know how to do advertising, don't know how to talk about their product, whether it's on social media, blah, 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 blah. Coming up with a good idea, this part is relatively straightforward. This is where most people fail as entrepreneurs. They just don't know how to create a buzz. They lose motivation. They spend 90% of their time here and here, and they spend 10% here. But my experience as an entrepreneur has definitely been the case of, well, listen, there's no excuses. You have to have a good product and a good price point, but 90% of your time should really be spent here. And maybe not that aggressive. I'm being dramatic for the sake of this session, but that for me is the real reason why businesses tend to fail. But anyway,
I have a question. Where quality falls here?
So quality, bro, inherently within your product, right?
Okay.
Whatever product you're building, quality would fall within your product, right? So the idea that you can build a product and the pricing will be, determinant of the product versus the price would determine the quality that your audience, etc., is aligned with, right? And again, within your strategy, your vision, mission, objectives, initiative, whenever you're building as a product or a service, it has to be fit for purpose, right? So if it's not fit for purpose, you're designing something that's going to inherently fail. Now, one of your key mission statements could be, right? If it's that important, and it should really be, it could be here, quality, right?
Okay.
So like quality is relative, like quality at Primark, which is like I think they've opened one in Kuwait, right? Anyway, Primark is, I don't know if everyone knows what Primark is, but the quality in Primark it's a discounted retailer, right? Whereas the quality in Hermes will be very different. So that quality journey needs to be understood, whether it's positive or negative, right? And that will have to translate into your product and into your price point. And even your promotion, that would be aligned with all of this, and even where it's sold. Maybe if it's I remember historically Primark never used to sell any of their clothes online. It was, if you wanted Primark clothes, you could only go and buy it from the Primark store, but now they've gone online as well. But anyway, it's a different story. But quality for me is something that you would capture initially at your strategy level, but then it would cascade down into your product, price, place, and promotion. I hope that makes sense. Go for it, bro. What up?
The actual reason startups fail is due to timing, not promotion.
Sorry, say again?
The actual reason why a majority of startups fail is down to timing. It's not promotion. It's statistics.
Maybe so, bro. I was giving my opinion. I find that the most.
I'm just saying statistically, that's the reason why. There's been studies on it as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe so, but I find that, you know, in many instances, and this is funny because when I do a lot of work with kind of startup organizations, a lot of it is to do, you know, I find a lot of it people say is product market fit, right? And product market fit is usually a function of timing, right? But timing also assumes that you've done product, you've done your kind of market, and you've done a sufficient amount of marketing, right? But when I've deep dived into these things, I find that most people just don't know how to do marketing, right? That's what I find, and that's why I'm constantly on TikTok and I'm doing this, because I come up with a good idea, I go to market and I push it, and there are products that I've tried to sell, for example, on LinkedIn, which haven't worked, but on TikTok they sell very well. And I could have blamed it on something, but I generally tend to find that the world is a big place, and even timing for me, it's a case of, you know, and you can be. I'm not dismissing timing. I'm just saying, based on my opinion, I found that the reason why most businesses fail, in my experience, is people say product market fit, but I just find it to be the case where the founders are just not interested in marketing. I find, in fact, even the founders that I advise, I find that in many instances, what they're doing is they're focusing on this, and they're trying to analytically, or some through partnerships, try to do the promotion. They never take ownership of it. So, I mean, again, these are just my ideas, but yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it is timing, but then that type of statistical thing, I suspect it's people saying, okay, well, that we were just selling the wrong thing at the wrong time, right? But those are the same founders who don't know how to do sales and don't know how to do marketing. Anyway, it's my personal thing, but I try to, this is just, again, my personal interpretation of it. So keeping it moving on that note, business model input. So what are the key inputs we need in order to make sure that our business model, those 4 boxes, product, price, place, promotion, in order for those that to work, in order for that to land, in order for that to, you know, resonate with the people that we're trying to sell to, we obviously need to understand customer needs. Where are we in the value chain of delivering to our customer? Are we B2B? Are we B2C? And so on and so forth. What is the cost structure of running our business? We need to understand the cost in order to then add a margin on top of it. And of course, the revenue stream. Is it a subscription? Is it some kind of, and I'm doing this daily. I'm going through this challenge every single day with my business, because I like to build businesses which are dynamic, which react very, very fast. So different revenue streams, value chain, cost structures, customer needs, all of this stuff. This is fundamentally what I'm thinking about. And these are critical inputs into my business model. So if that's the case, then we need to say, okay, well, from a business model design perspective, we need to be thinking about what is our value proposition? What is it that we're offering our customers? What is the delivery mechanism, right? How do we get it to our customer, and how do we charge them for that? You know, how do we monetize it? You know, and then of course, is there enough scaling logic behind what we're doing? Will it allow us to grow with, and you know, so for example, even for our business, right? I do products which are at a group level, and I do products at an individual level, and the ones at an individual level make us a lot more money, but fundamentally they are not scalable, right? I can't constantly be teaching one person. I can't teach 2 people one-on-one at the same time, right? It doesn't scale, but it creates enough value. And so accordingly, I'm constantly adjusting through this kind of design. If I'm designing the business model, how do I make it work? It's a very, very important thing that we go through. And again, business leaders are thinking about these things all the time, right? I think in light of kind of tech and the world in which we live in, a lot of people are always thinking about this, but it is, you know, is it creating value? What's the delivery mechanism? How do we monetize it? All these things become extremely important as well. But I think scale, especially in the world of tech now, obviously, I see you guys, a lot of you guys already registered. We're building a tech product now, so inshallah, you'll see that very soon. But again, scale tends to be the one that kind of gets the most attention, but it's more than just scale. To that end, guys, what's the process of refining your business model? It is kind of like this kind of tech cycle, right? So we have to prototype something. What is it we're trying to do? We have to test it. We have to refine it. We have to scale it. We have to optimize it. And it is this process. So again, I don't want to go into the crazy detail here, but I think it's quite obvious, right? The implementation of anything has to go through a prototyping, testing, refining, and the speed at which you are able to do this will fundamentally allow you to determine whether or not something is good or bad. And of course, it's speed and of course cost as well. How fast can you get your feedback? That feedback loop has to be good and sorry, you have to get from here to here very fast. And of course, you need to be able to collect feedback and then make decisions, right? That's the process of implementing a business model. And once we get to that stage now, guys, so where are we within this journey? Within this journey, right? Sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit here. We've looked at fundamentally, so this is what leaders are doing every day, right? They're designing their vision, mission, objectives, initiatives, and then they are looking also at their business model, which is all of this stuff, right? Product, price, place, and promotion. So we've done this, and now we've also done this. So that's only, so this, I don't want to say it's 33%, 33%, 33%, but we've done 1, we've done 2, and now we need to do 3. Now, but I want to be clear, right? I want to be clear. Yes, you would usually start with your strategy, but it's not always done in this way, right? You could even start sometimes with your operating model, and your operating model will dictate your strategy. Your strategy will then need to change this and so on. So the movement of what's given priority, your starting point, can be dynamic, but traditionally, this is 1, but this is 2, and 2, these things are kind of done simultaneously. But obviously, 1, 2, and 2 is a bit difficult to explain. So in many instances, you start with your strategy, then your business model, and then your operating model. But I don't want that to be stuck in your head. The reason we do this triangle, right, which is 1, 2, 3, is because it's dynamic and it has to be adjustable, right? So we've done strategy, we've done business model. Now we can talk about operating model. So if your strategy is direction, if your business model is your revenue engine, question then becomes, what is your operating model? So strategy, let's just do a quick recap, right? So if your strategy, if strategy is your direction, your business model equals your revenue engine, what is your operating model? Any ideas, guys? What is your operating model?
Are we talking about processes and procedures?
Absolutely. So let's have a look at it. This is an interesting thinking, right? So if we go back to that B12 framework, so if your strategy is here, if this is your strategy, vision, mission, objectives, initiatives, and that's the direction of your business model is your product, price, place, promotion, and that's the revenue engine of your business. What is your operating model, which consists of your people, process, tech, and governance?
The operations.
It is absolutely your operations. I like to think of it as effectively, sorry, give me one moment. Let me get back to the slide. There's a lot of slides. I told you there's a lot of slides today, right? Oops, sorry, I think I missed it completely, right? Oops, yeah, I've completely missed it. Sorry, guys. It's effectively, for me, rather, it becomes your, oops, I just spoiled the surprise there. It becomes your delivery system, right? So if this is the direction strategy, your business model is your revenue engine, then in order to make all of this come together, you need a robust delivery system, right? Which in other words is your operations, absolutely, right? So then the question is, we know where we're going, we know how we're going to get there, and we know what we want to achieve. We've got our product, price, place, promotions, and stuff all aligned. We need to have a robust set of operations or a delivery system to actually get that stuff done, right? So to that end, what we need is the right balance of people.
Framework.
Yeah. So we need to understand who does the work and how are they organized? How many people do we need? What types of qualifications do they need? We need, and remember, organizations, what is a business? It's just lots of different processes, right? Layered upon layers of processes, right? This is a process, right? And there's lots of processes, right? Within an organization. Some processes require multiple teams to give approvals and inputs and stuff like that, right? But that's ultimately, a business is just hundreds, if not thousands of different types of processes. Now, of course, right? Processes are great, but in light of AI, in light of CRMs, in light of tech, right? These processes are then augmented using technology. So there is a technology augmentation within the processes and workflows within our organizations. And AI is going to fundamentally not only change the processes, but could also have an impact on the people that we're talking about as well. AI could potentially recalibrate also our governance structure. So what is governance? Governance is one of those things that's extremely important, but doesn't get we don't talk about governance very much in businesses. I'm talking about in the Boost Analyst program, because it is a bit boring, but it's extremely important. Governance is about protecting the integrity of your business, right? It's about ensuring that people do not have more authority than they should have, because if they do have more authority than they should have, the integrity or the, let's say, the I guess the security, the sanctity of a business could be compromised, right? So governance is there to ensure that the rules and accountability and decision making is all kind of within the context of the technology. So for example, a junior guy can't approve an invoice for more than 100 million reals, for example. It's a bad example, but that's an example of governance. So a junior guy has to document, or rather upload into the system. A senior guy has to approve. And if it's above a certain value of 100 million, it has to go to the CEO. That is an example of policy and governance that protects the integrity of the business. Because if this guy, the junior guy, could approve something, the business might die within 20 minutes. So when you have large businesses with hundreds, if not thousands of people working for it, governance becomes extremely important. Whereas obviously in smaller businesses, governance is neither here nor there, because it's usually one-man show, two-man show, whatever, right? But then again, you still need to have an understanding of who your people are, the key processes, the key technologies, and of course, the governance as well, right? Extremely, extremely, extremely important, right? So
It's basically a combination of your SOPs and your org chart, right?
Yes, but also technology as well, right? So SOPs and org chart wouldn't necessarily say technology, but every time there's a new type of technology that comes into it, you could change the number of people you have. You have to train the people. You might have to adjust your processes. You might have to adjust your governance, right? And sometimes there may be an incident that happens that your governance requires you to change some of the configuration of your technology. Like take, for example, an ERP system. What is an ERP system? An ERP system is basically like a lot of these set processes. It's digitizing some of the processes that you use a lot every single day, right? That's what an ERP is initially, at least, was initially designed to do. HR, finance, approving holidays, etc. That's something that every organization does. But in light of it just being a bit of a pain in the backside, they've created technology which automates that workflow, and because it includes, lots of different people being involved in it, and so on and so forth. So again, that's the role of technology. So, and again, if your strategy is to double the amount of, double your sales in Vietnam, and you have 10 salespeople in Vietnam, maybe you now need 20 salespeople in Vietnam, right? So the strategy could be, so basically this affects each other. And then of course there will be external effects to this as well. External being outside of the operating model, if that makes sense. So very, very important. So this all translate really nicely into, oh, sorry, where do I go? Keep pressing the wrong button. So again, what have we looked at here? This is how it all works now, right? So we've looked at the strategy, which is your vision, mission, objective, initiative, and how you design it. What are the inputs? What are the key configurations you need to be thinking about? We've done the same now for operating business model, and we're now doing the same for the operating model. So you can see how the 12 boxes, B12, that's the 12 part of the B12, these 12 boxes need to be adjusted constantly in order for you to be creating value. And that's why I wanted to go through it in a lot of detail, because it helps kind of, it's easy to say, yeah, these 12 boxes, but what are these 12 boxes? What are the inputs to these 12 boxes and so on, right? That's the important part. So to that end, if we continue with our operating model, right? What shapes your operating model? That's kind of the conversation we were just having. The organizational structure, the roles, the hierarchy, the reporting lines, the processes and workflows. What are the key activities, the handoffs, the accountability, who's responsible? The technology, the systems and data, the technology platforms, the insights, and of course, the governance, compliance, risk. These are the things that will fundamentally allow you to adjust and edit your operating model. In continuation of that, what are the, what is the process of designing an operating model? This is like consulting 101, right? Consulting 101 is, what is our current state? What does our organization look like today? Right? What is the future state? We need a much more lean organization. So we have one person here, this thing here, we shut this thing down. We have a much more lean organization. And then we have to determine what's the gap between the two, right? So we determine what's the gap between this two. We need to train someone, we need to hire someone, and we need to fire someone, right? That's the gap between the two. And then of course that needs to be turned into some kind of roadmap, right? So we go from here to here to here, whatever it is. Does that make sense, guys? This is like literally this, what is this? Is called like an as-is assessment versus a to-be assessment, right? In KPMG, it was called as-is and then to-be. This is like consulting framework 101, right? But again, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you don't do a good job of collecting the current state, your target design is going to be useless. Your gap assessment will be useless. Your implementation will be useless. So again, protecting the integrity of your current state and being able to do it, at a very good level with a key understanding of where the organization is heading and where it needs to head is going to be critical. That's why I always say, man, listen, consultant. Well, I don't always say it, but I've said it recently, I should say. Consultants and consultants will get better with AI, right? There's this idea that now that we have AI, why do we need consultants, right? There's a question, and it's a genuine question. But the reality is that consultants will get better with AI before people will get better with AI. Does that make sense? So if this is where your average person is today, a consultant is a little bit faster, right? But with AI, before these people get to the same level as where consultants are today, these guys will also improve. Does that make sense? And probably to a higher extent. So again, understanding the endpoint, defining, being able to realize what is good, and that goes back to the thing that I was mentioning right at the beginning, right? The thing that most people who are not consultants don't have is this definition of what is good. But because as a consultant, you're doing it in multiple projects, multiple scenarios, multiple different contexts, you kind of build that spider sense for good much faster than others. And AI fundamentally relies on your ability to know what is good in order for you to direct it, because it is garbage in, garbage out. Now, what that means in the future, I don't know. I can't imagine, based on my usage of AI today, that a guy who knows nothing about consulting will be able to build something better than I can with AI. I can't imagine that's going to happen anytime soon. Maybe not in my life, but who knows, in the future, when AI becomes fully autonomous, then maybe that will be the case. But for the time being, AI will make people who are good at stuff much better before it makes people who don't know anything about something as good as the people who are very good. Does that make sense? So for me, it's not an equalizer, right? AI is not an equalizer yet. Maybe in the
I would just
future.
disagree on the last part of that statement that you made. It's
Go
like
for it,
people
bro.
who don't know. Well, you said people who don't know anything will be as good as the people who used to know before. Blah blah blah. So that's the part I don't agree with, because people who don't know anything,
Yeah.
they won't know how to utilize the AI. They won't know. They won't even know what to ask.
Oh, so I think we're
If
saying
we're
the same
talking
thing.
about like a CEO or entrepreneur who says like, yeah, I don't need help from anyone, I'll just use AI. It's like, yeah, but what are you gonna ask?
No. So, bro, we're saying the same thing. Sorry, we are
Oh,
on
okay.
the same. Yeah, we're not.
Okay, fine.
I agree 100%. That's exactly the point I'm making. So if this is your kind of average Joe, right, and this is your consultant or someone who has these skills that we work with leaders, without AI, they're already a little bit further up the value chain, right? A little bit smarter, a little bit more clued up. With AI, yeah, these guys might be able to reach that level, but these guys also have AI, so these guys will be also significantly smarter now as well, right? So for me, AI is not the equalizer.
Yeah, it's an amplifier.
Yeah, exactly, right? It amplifies what you're good at. Now, in the future, where AI then becomes completely autonomous, then maybe this gap will reduce, right? Maybe in the future, this gap will reduce. Again, I don't think it, there's always going to be a difference. There's always going to be a delta between your average Joe and your consultant. Now, is that gap, is that delta worthwhile? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't think we will have to worry about that. Oh, when I say we, I mean me and my generation, right? Gen Z, who knows, man? You guys are cooked as far as I know, but that's a different story. So that's how I like to think of, the whole AI debate in consultants, right? So just thinking that, okay, well, AI makes everyone the same as a consultant, nonsense. Like I'm pretty comfortable going into any meeting with anyone, and I know I'll be able to make a positive contribution. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that I've just worked on so many different projects in so many different contexts that I'll ask a couple of smart questions, I'll figure it out, I'll be at the same table as them, maybe not at the same level as them as technical competence, but I'll be having conversations. But a lot of people will struggle, right? And AI will not help you overcome that struggle. It's a case of time and effort and learning stuff very fast. So the objective of a good operating model, naturally, it has to deliver efficiency, it has to deliver agility and accountability, and of course, scalability. So again, what are we looking for here? We're looking for our anchors, right? If we can determine what's good for our operating model, it has to deliver these things. So our configuration of our operating model, our configuration of our business model has to always result in some kind of, what is good. So again, extremely, extremely important stuff. I know it gets a bit tedious, but really, in order for us to really understand business model strategy, business model, operating model, you have to go through this process. It is genuinely very, very interesting stuff, because I promise you, this is how CEOs and decision makers are creating value for their organizations. They're looking at whether we are going in the right direction, whether our engine is, whether we have the right engine, and whether we have the right delivery systems, right? So if we are able to kind of design, right? If we are able to design our strategy, business model, and operating model accordingly, based on everything we've discussed so far, if we're able to design this and we've come up with what we feel is a good hypothesis initially, right? We start with a hypothesis, right? Once we've completed the hypothesis, then we go into some level of execution, right? We have to be able to monitor the performance of this calibration, right? This whole thing has to be calibrated, right, in order for us to create value. And that's what we've gone through. We went through the strategy, vision, mission, objectives, initiatives. We went through the business model, product, price, place, promotion. And of course, we looked at operations. We looked at the operating model, people, process, technology, and governance. So this calibration, in order for us to determine whether or not we've calibrated it correctly, we have to have the requisite infrastructure of monitoring performance. Right? It's very, very important. So let me show you what that means. That's what it means, right? So once we've defined our strategy, our business model, and our operating model, we have to have the requisite performance infrastructure within it to monitor whether we have made good or bad decisions. It's very, very, very important, right? Without that, nothing, you don't know if you're progressing or whether you're regressing. You don't know. So this question then becomes, what is performance infrastructure? How do we measure, control, and improve collaboration, right? Because this is our calibration, and we're constantly adjusting it. The organization needs to be, whenever you're making decisions, there has to be touch points, there has to be some level of data that's created which acts as our reference points or as our anchors in order to then determine whether we're making good or bad decisions. So what does the performance infrastructure look like that holds all of this together? It looks a bit like this, right? We need to be able to very clearly, define what is important to us. Is revenue more important to us, or is efficiency more important to us? We need to be able to baseline today. Where are we? What is our performance today? We need to set some KPIs and some targets, and we need to have the requisite infrastructure to monitor the progress. So define what's important, establish what your baseline is, set what your targets are, and then be able to monitor that. And who does a lot of this? PMO. The role of PMO in organizations tends to be doing this always on a day-to-day basis, right? So the role of PMO in many instances is not just about seeing the progress of projects. It's about defining what's important, what's the baseline today, are we hitting our KPIs? And when it's not going well, they interject and they say, okay, we need more support here, we need to raise this, we need to flag this. That's why I like to think of PMO within organization as your police officers. They are the popo of organizations, right? The police officers, right? So that's the role of PMO. The role of PMO is not just dates, right? It's not just about, oh, you said you were going to finish it by this date. It's about performance management. And this, as an input, goes directly to who? Strategy. The strategy team, his job is to help define this, and then the job of the PMO is to monitor this. So strategy, so when you meet people who work in strategy, right, your chief strategy officer, in many instances, or rather, it will be strategy and performance, right? You'll meet people who have a job title, strategy and performance. You'll meet people who work in the strategy and PMO, right? A lot of people say this because the two are very much interlinked. And the thing that interlinks them is this measurement of actual progress and performance. So what does good infrastructure look like? It's about alignment, KPIs that reflect the priorities. It's about accountability. So ownership, consequences are clear. And of course, adaptability. So whatever you do something, you can evolve as the business evolves, right? So this is what good looks like. So if anyone says to you, why have you chosen these metrics to monitor? You can say, well, number one, these are the KPIs that reflect priorities. This is the ownership and consequences are clear. And of course, metrics evolve as the business evolves, right? So what feeds it? What feeds the monitoring? What feeds the kind of performance infrastructure? What are strategic goals, operational data, benchmarks, financial constraints? All of these things are the inputs, right? into what should be our targets, what should be, the things that we're prioritizing, and so on and so forth. So again, hopefully, inshallah, it's starting to make sense of how it all comes together, right? And then, of course, setting this up in your organization, the whole monitoring process, you set your targets, you measure, you review, you improve. And again, it's just this loop system. Organizations do love a good loop system, right? And that's how all of this comes together really, really nicely, right? So I want to just contextualize everything we've said so far, right? Contextualize everything we've said so far. But let's just do a quick recap of what we've done so far, right? What we've looked at in a very short period of time. So just to be clear, guys, we've covered a lot, right? In a very short period of time. But this is what we've covered. This one slide, I've basically expanded this one slide into a 2-hour workshop, right? One slide into a 2-hour workshop. So we've now understood what is a strategy, how do we design a strategy, what are the key anchors of a strategy, and so on. What are the mechanics of a strategy, cascading down, and then performance management up, right? We've looked at all of that from a strategy perspective. But again, strategy alone itself means nothing. In order to empower your strategy, you need to have a revenue engine, right? We've looked at product, price, click, and promotion, right? And then, of course, we've looked at our delivery mechanisms, right? Or our delivery system. We looked at our people, processes, tech, and governance. And in order to monitor whether that's actually working and making progress, we've also now looked at our performance infrastructure. So almost anytime we make a movement here, here, and here, and here, there should be some level of impact at the performance infrastructure level. Are things working better? If you change, for example, the number of people you have, does that increase your performance or decrease your performance, right? If you change your mission statement or your initiatives, does that have an impact here, right? That's ultimately any change here, any change here, any change here should be reflected here. And if it doesn't, you have to ask yourself why. Or if it does and how big that change is, ask yourself why. So there are multiple things here, which I hope is starting to make a bit more sense. What do you guys think? Does that make sense, bros? So any changes at this level, and this level should, in theory, well, more than theory, right? Just logically, should have some kind of impact here. That makes sense, bros? Everyone clear with that? Right? Changes here, here, and here should be reflected here. So this is almost like the experiment, right? So any kind of experiments in your organization, you should be able to capture some kind of performance via the infrastructure you've created. So if we take that as a basis, let's talk about transformation. So this is what a transformation program would usually look like. So you would start off with some level of internal assessment. You would then look at some kind of external assessment and some kind of stakeholder engagement. This will fundamentally give you the design principles, right? This will give you the design principles for adjusting your strategy, your business model, and your operating model, right? And what we're trying to do here is create that interdependability, and obviously that interdependability, and also your independent and interdependent, right? So this is what we're trying to create here. And the outputs of the, when we talk about our performance infrastructure, so, right, that should give us, whilst we're adjusting, we're able to say, okay, focus, what are you really trying to achieve? Choice, where will we play and how will we win? Advantage, what is the unique value do we bring? And then, of course, alignment is everyone in the business aligned. So this is what consultants like myself spend hours doing with our clients every single day. We're adjusting this, sometimes at a hypothetical level, sometimes at an actual level. But this is kind of, this configuration or transformation rather, happens at two levels. One is the configuration level, and then one is at the execution level, right? So transformation is about configuring this from where it is today to where it needs to be, and then of course going ahead and executing it. Does that make sense, guys? So that's the context of every single transformation. So if there is a AI transformation, this whole thing has to adjust. If there is a price adjustment, then potentially everything else needs to change. If there is a new initiative we need to do, we need to maybe rethink, bits of this and bits of that, right? If we need to double our revenue, we need to think, okay, if there's an initiative to 2x our revenue, right? 2x revenue, we need to think price, we need to think product, we need to think promotion, right? We need to think about, do we need more people? Do we need different processes? Do we need new tech? Maybe we need to adjust our governance, right? So a single decision can have a huge impact on a particular project. And depending on the priorities of an engagement, this is why understanding each of these 1, 2, and 3 is very, very important. But understanding it dynamically, that's the key word for me. Like, it's not linear, it's dynamic. Sometimes you have to say, listen, we want to increase our revenue twofold, but we have certain limitations. And therefore the logical thing to do is, increase our promotion by $100 million, but we don't have $100 million. So what can we do in lieu of not having $100 million? So that's how that all works. And then the implementation of that, again, I think I've shown you guys this before. So the design happens at this level, right? The design happens at this level, right? But then that's reflected as a function of objectives, right? Objectives are then objectives plus KPIs. Those are then cascaded down here to the project managers, the tactical level, right? They create the actual project plan, and then it's executed at this level, right? So this is, these are your leaders, these are your PMOs, and these are your workers, right? So what you're doing is you start at this level, you create and cascade down, and you monitor progress up, and then this becomes a loop system within every single organization, right? And that's how this works again and again and again and again. What do you guys think? It was a lot to get through, but I promise you, the reason I wanted to do this is because you can, before you solve problems in an organization, if you don't understand how organizations kind of position themselves, it won't work, right? You can try to solve a problem, but if you don't understand context, this is why, again, if you don't understand this level of how businesses are organized, you can't prompt this into an organization. Maybe you can. I think it will be a bit difficult, but you have to have this, because even AI, when it gives you results, you as a human have to be able to determine whether or not it's giving you a good answer or not. So defining good and being comfortable with what is good is not only useful in an organization in terms of the future of work, which is AI driven, you have to be comfortable with what is good, right? What's good? This is, for me, is a critical thing, man. What is good? Defining good. Your spider sense for good is going to be critical. Because even when you use AI, I've seen it so many times where people use AI and they've come up with a decent answer, but you can challenge them and they can immediately make them go in a different direction because they don't have the anchor of what is good. They don't have that anchor, right? And a lot of that anchor, the kind of the integrity and the strength and the weight of that anchor comes from project experience. And AI can't give you project experience until AI really can, until it goes crazy, until you can create Fahad AI or Abu PowerPoint AI equivalent. And I can say, no, bro, you don't know what you're talking about, which I don't think is a million miles off, but it's not there today. On that note, guys, that is the end of the session, right? Oh, actually, sorry, that's not the end. So I want to show you one last thing. Last thing. I promise you, this is the last thing. I want to show you guys what does good actually look like. Now, in my world, in consulting, right? If someone was to say to me, Fahad, what is a good strategy, right? For me, a good strategy is a function of, oops, sorry, let me change the color here. A function for me, a good strategy is So what does good look like? For me, good looks like from a, when we're talking about this type of configuration, not just strategy across everything. So we got strategy, business model, and operating model. If someone said to me, what is good? For me, I would say something which is fit for purpose, something which has a high probability of success, right? Something which is tangible, something which is understandable by all, not just by leadership, right? Something which is balancing kind of resource with outcomes, right? Something that kind of makes all of this happen. So for me, this is kind of like my checklist, right? How do you know that you've done all of this well? Remember, each of these has 4 different components, and you have to balance and anchor each of the 4 different components together as well. But as a kind of output which is kind of consumed, or rather an output which is kind of aligned completely, right? For me, the holy grail of what is good is probably being able to put your entire strategy on one page. If you can, on one page, demonstrate very clearly that what you're saying is fit for purpose, there's a high probability of success, there is a tangibility, it's understandable, and there is a balance between resource and outcome. If you can do that on one page, for me, that is the holy grail of strategy, right? Now, some people may disagree. Those people are stupid. I'm just kidding. But some people may disagree. But for me, one page strategy is the holy grail of strategy. And not just one page for the sake of one page. One page in order to make it clear as to what everyone needs to do in order to make something happen. And for me, inherently, this is what that looks like. A balanced scorecard, right? This is what a good kind of strategy representation looks like, because it's very easy to understand everything we've said so far: the vision, the mission, the priorities, the results. And you can change these. It's not that these are fixed, right? But the reason I'm a big fan of the balanced scorecard is because you can put everything on one piece of paper, right? Whatever your configuration is of your strategy, business model, operating model can be reflected here. And the balanced scorecard, just for me, it's just a nice tool which allows you to bring it all together, and it allows people to see what we're trying to do, what we're doing, and so on. Right? You can just use this part of it, which is the strategy map. It's a good place to start again. But again, strategy mapping without having, what measures, what targets, which initiatives you're using becomes a little bit academic. So again, being able to quantify this and put this all together and just have this on everyone's desktop, like that for me is what makes strategies actually work. So obviously there will be a lot of supplementary support information to this, right? Supplementary information, or my favorite word, in the appendix, there'll be a ton of stuff, and that will be all of this stuff, right? Vision, mission, objectives, initiatives. Why? The why is usually going to be captured in the appendix, but I like this as an output because it allows it to talk about the same thing. Right? Now, obviously, this is made up. I just found this on Google, right? This whole thing I found on Google, but I just like the structure of this because it does that. And for me, guys, that is the end of today's session. I appreciate it was very intense. We went through a lot, but before we can start doing problem solving like a consultant, we need to understand the institution of organizations. That means value creation. That means defining a strategy. That means defining a business model, an operating model, performance infrastructure, and of course, being able to understand what good looks like. Once you've done that, then you can start saying, well, okay, well, now that I understand these institutions, now I can start solving problems within it. So inshallah, in the next session that we're going to do, we're going to go into much more detail about problem solving within institutions. Any questions from me, bros?
Yes, I have 2 questions actually.
Further.
So the first question is about the strategy slide, the first one you talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said that each objective will be translated into a project or initiative.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, will each project will contribute only to one of the three objectives, like strategic, financial, operational, or more than one?
It could be, I mean, look, if you think a bit from a perspective of implementation, right? What you want to do is keep it simple, right? So the more objectives and the more interlinked objectives and initiatives you have, the more complicated it will get to actually achieve it, right? So like if you see here even, right, and I didn't make this is just something I found on the internet. So you're trying to target is to increase net profit by 5 years, right? Sorry, 5% per year, sorry, right? So you're going to introduce a new accounting system. That for me is a terrible initiative, right? How will a new accounting system contribute towards that? It won't, right? Does that make sense, bro? Like there has to be that flow. This has to make sense. So the more convoluted your objectives are with multiple objectives, keep it simple. Is it a strategic initiative? Is it a financial initiative? Or is it an operational initiative? Then you'll be very clearly be able to say, well, the objective for this then should be this. The objective for that should be this, and vice versa. Does that make sense, bro?
Yeah.
So if the objective is to increase sales by 5%, the one initiative could be a new product, which would be an initiative in itself. One initiative could be adjust pricing strategies, right? Another one could be increase average order value, right? Now, new product and pricing strategies together could help you do this one, right?
Yeah.
But monitoring it could be independent. So maybe you can argue, well, actually, this initiative doesn't need to be a separate initiative. It just needs to be here, but it will have its own financial thing here. Now, when we talk about new product could also have a strategic thing, right? Which is, look, Pepsi today doesn't sell energy drinks. So strategically, we need to enter the energy market. So releasing a product can also be part of a strategic objective. We need to release 10 new energy products, for example. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, being able to, and I promise you, this comes with time, and it doesn't come with. You're not going to read books after books and to get this much better. It just comes with time. But the main thing again is clarity. So even though this setup, and again, let's be clear, this setup is good. I like the setup, but the content here is pretty dog shit.
Okay. Yeah, and the second question is, you also talked about the calibration of the process between strategy, operating model, and the business model.
Yeah.
How often do you have to do that as an organization?
Excellent.
Like with or without the consultant?
This is an excellent question. So normally, depending on the complexity and the size of your organization, right, and how long it's existed, right, you would have different rules and different kind of procedures and policies. But for your average organization, a strategy refresh would happen every, say, 2 years. But for a technology business and stuff like that, it could be quicker. So, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing here, but sorry. So when we talk about recalibration, right, it very much depends on the circumstance. And this is why consultants always say it depends. It annoys a lot of people, but it really does depend, right? But anything between 12 and 24 months is a good point, because anything less than 12 months, you haven't really given it a chance to kind of ride out, right? And anything more than 24 months, maybe you've gone too far. The accuracy of the information is not going to increase massively. Does that make sense, bro?
Yeah.
And the larger the organization, the kind of more dynamic the strategy of the organization is. Like, for example, people are today hesitant to implement their AI strategies in organizations. Why? Because it's a huge investment, and we haven't really figured out when the evolution of AI is going to slow down. Before people invest in AI needs to slow down its aggressive kind of evolution, because we started off with ChatGPT and I was like, oh shit, if you start reorganizing your building as your business as a function of ChatGPT, in 6 months there could be a ChatGPT X, right? Which is like 10 times better. So if you built your organization based on this ChatGPT basic, and now 6 months later you have this, you've basically screwed up. So a lot of people are hesitant right now to kind of really take on board or really fundamentally adjust their business in light of AI, because the evolution, right? So I think I said this previously, but it's a good thing to discuss, right? So every type of technology has a like a life cycle, right? It looks a bit like this, right? Whether it's, you know, email, web, whatever, it has this, and then something after it follows up, right? And that's kind of how the waves of technology work, right? It tends to work like this, and they happen at the same time. Now, where are we in terms of AI? Are we at the beginning? Are we here, or are we here? I would probably think we're here, but the point is that it could continue evolving and getting better. So businesses like to make decisions on implementing technology, etc., once they have a level of comfort that they're not going to get left behind by making an investment choice. Making an investment choice is like getting off the bus. So once you're on the bus, all right, you're waiting to get off at the right stop, but getting off at the right stop, if the bus continues to go and you get off at this stop, you're going to get screwed because you've invested hundreds of millions, you've changed your business model, operating model, blah, 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 blah. And therefore, the bus continues to go. You see what I'm saying? It's like the calibration, whether it's 12 or 24 months, is really determined by your business and your organization. I hope that makes sense.
And this will only change if the price of AI adoption and the time needed to complete that process will go increasingly down with time, right?
Yes, but if then, like, for example, you know, like what I said now, today AI needs to be guided by humans, right? Because inherently AI doesn't know what is good, right? But in the future, when you're able to recreate, you know, like a full-on consultant whereby he is guiding you towards what is good, then you see what I'm saying, bro? Like, today AI is going to be today AI is different to what it will be. Is today's AI is different to yesterday's AI? It will be different to tomorrow's AI. So imagine what it will be like in 2 years' time.
Kind of like installing a new like software update into a consulting robot.
Exactly. But the kind of software updates of AI are happening so fast, so dramatically. Businesses don't know when to get off the bus.
Exactly.
And then basically make a decision like, "Khalas, this is good for us." Because in 6 months, something completely new could come and destroy everything. I remember seeing, and what you're going to find, and this is my thing, is businesses will have no choice but to implement one of the big 3 or 4 AI solutions. OpenAI, you know, Microsoft, whatever they're doing, and maybe Deep Search. You know, so basically there's going to be 5 or 6 big AI players, and they are going to start releasing apps, and they're going to start releasing, you know, bolt-ons and so on and so forth, right? That all of the smaller AI companies will either get eaten up or just disappear. Like I think the AI landscape has been fit, so organizations have to just determine which one they're going to go with, and they just have to take the bet that they're working, that they are, you know, that inshallah this will be the right company that we chose. That's how I see it. That's just my 2 cents. Any other questions, homies?
Yes, Fahad. I have a quick question on
Further, bro.
strategy. So
I think you
I had a
disappeared.
question. Yani, what's the difference between, let's say, we implement, whether it's business operation and an investment strategy? I'm just trying to connect the dots here.
It's a very good question. So let's think about it here, right? So we have strategy, we have here business model, and we have here operating model. All right. So where does investment strategy sit in this? Right? Is that the question, bro? I think that was what the question was.
I think the approach is what I mean.
What do you mean? What do you mean by the approach?
Like, okay, let's say we were coming up with an investment strategy for an X project.
Okay.
Do we follow the same steps for an investment strategy, like comparing it to a business strategy or any other strategy that we sort of implement, like the framework and everything else?
So for me, the investment strategy, bro, would be input. The investment strategy would be independent of this, right? But the investment strategy could be an input to this or an output of this, right? So let me show you what I mean.
Yeah.
So we've decided that we want to build, an apartment block with 4,000 new apartments, right? So
Correct.
for me, that could then help us dictate our strategy, business model, and operating model. Or as a part of our strategy, we could have identified now that through our performance infrastructure that there is a gap, and now we need to build 4,000 apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense, bro? So the
Yes.
rationale for a strategy could help you determine what this should be, or this could help you determine that you need to make an investment.
All right.
Yeah. But what you invest in could happen irrespective, or what you invest in could be then become an initiative as well.
Okay, so just to make my question a bit more detailed, so you know how in the strategy, like as we do it, basically we sort of assess the current, like, let's say, situation, or like what sort of this, like our current position, and then what sort of choices that we have, and then what sort of actions we should take in order to put a strategy in place. Now my question is more focused on what sort of choices, like let's say the middle part. You know how the Rubik's Cube thing that you showed us earlier? Yeah. So I'm asking about that part.
So the Rubik's Cube part, bro, is the problem solving part.
Yeah.
So now that we've understood all of this stuff, right? Now we are able to determine, okay, now we've understood how organizations are organized. Now we can identify the gaps. So once we've understood how it's organized, then we can identify the gaps.
So
one of the gaps could be an investment.
Is this the same applied to the investment strategy? Like, do we follow the same exact steps?
The same exact steps of the Rubik's Cube, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Oh yeah. That answers my question. Okay.
Yeah. So
I thought it had sort of like a different approach, because I know it's a bit more financial related. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm following the right steps over here.
Yeah, no. So basically, bro, this is to understand how organizations are operating. The next step is then to determine what are the problems and how do we build solutions to those problems, of which one could be an investment. So if we say, look, we are fundamentally underachieving based on our sales, we need to invest in a new product. Before we decide that, we need to understand how it's organized.
I want to buy my new glasses.
You want new glasses?
Yeah.
Okay, baby. There you go. So inshallah, in next week's session, bro, we're going to talk more about the Rubik's Cube, how we can then adjust our Rubik's Cube to fill in the gaps. So if there are any challenges that we're having in the organization, the Rubik's Cube will tell us whether or not it's a valid challenge or not.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Fahad.
Sam, bro. Inshallah khair, guys. To that end, it's 8 o'clock. That means I've got to feed the babies, and that means I've got to feed Sultan, who's clearly here now. So inshallah, hopefully that was useful. Usman will be sharing the video.
Buy the glasses also.
Oh yeah, and I've got to go buy some glasses. Absolutely, he wants Spider-Man glasses. Thank you, Sultan.
Have fun, guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, guys, take care, man. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Salam wa rahmatullah.